Good afternoon, Kirk. How are you doing?
I think I'm doing really good, Sheldon.
Good.
I don't
Well,
know why I'm laughing. Sometimes, you're just doing so well, you just laugh easy.
okay, so I think I know why you're laughing. You're back from camping,
Well,
which
that's
just gives you
true.
this heightened joy of being able to sleep in your own bed.
Mhm. Oh, what a luxury. What a luxury to have a bed to sleep in.
Now, you're one of those people that actually enjoys camping and
I
being
do.
outdoors. That's not my thing. Although, when I was a kid, I enjoyed camping because I didn't have to set up the tent or cook the food or do any of that stuff. And for some reason, as a kid, the mosquitoes aren't as bad.
Yeah. Too busy having fun.
Yeah. But now that I'm a parent and I have got a kid who's scared of aphids, like it doesn't work for us. Plus, we have a massive dog that just he
Uh,
won't lay down, so it just doesn't work. But you were telling me a little bit about your camping trip. So you had some friends beside you, or your family was beside you in a you guys were sharing a couple camping spots. But then you had some people beside you that were partiers.
yeah, yeah. So we rented three campsites because there was a total of 18 of us, and we were all in a little triangle of sites. And then next door to us, immediately next door, where it was a group of people who literally the first night partied until 4 a.m. I was amazed that the park officials didn't come by and pay them a visit.
Well, they
So
went home and went to sleep.
they were, yeah, probably. So they were just having a good time, loud laughter and talking all night until about 4 a.m. And then a bear wandered into their campsite. And if you thought it was loud before, it really got loud then. And I'm trying to sleep and it's been a disaster up till then. So I got up to see, well, where's the bear coming next? I did have some bear spray because I thought better to be outside the tent and than inside. In fact, here's a pro tip. Don't use bear spray when you're inside your tent. So if the bear's outside, you're inside, stay away from the bear spray. So we managed to at least get that
Now,
part.
is that a pro tip because you've had personal experience with ingesting bear spray? No.
No, no, thank goodness, no. But it's been heavy on my mind on many places. I was camping in a wilderness area in Montana where we had grizzlies.
Yeah.
Literally had a grizzly bear pass by maybe like 50 feet from our tent. And this is wilderness. They're not used to people.
No.
And so you slept with your bear spray and there's a safety device you pull out because you may not have time to start fiddling away with a safety device when a grizzly bear is throwing you around by your left leg. So you pull it out and it lays beside your sleeping bag, and you just hope that while you're sleeping at night, you don't turn over and roll on your bear spray or accidentally grab something. You grab your sleeping bag in the night, and here you grab the bear spray and you hose yourself down. Never done
Okay,
that.
so you're this weekend. You've got the bear spray. You leave the tent. Where'd the bear go next?
Well, in that case, the shouting died down,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't see it. Of course, it's pitch dark at night, and I was not. I have a headlamp, but I had that off at the moment um, for various night reasons. But the next day, middle of the day, I heard a bunch of kids yelling at another campsite, and I figured, oh, I better go over there. Kids, they're probably going to poke it in the backside with a stick or something. So I went over there just to make sure everybody stayed safe. But the bear was on the move, and he ran right through our campsite. Literally, my daughter and son-in-law and our two little grandkids are in there. Bear goes thundering right on through. I tried to get ahead of them and ahead of the bear so I could head it off give it a little puff of bear spray and hopefully drive it back into the bush. But past another campsite, and there's the bear standing on its hind legs with the feet on the hood of the car, and there's a woman inside the car staring at the bear, and it's staring at her.
That car
We
has become an
started to open the
outhouse.
doors. We came and we said, no, just stay in your car till the bear's gone. And so I've managed to get ahead of it. And I was just about to give it a puff when somebody behind me threw a stone and messed up my shot. So, but I was on the cell phone with the Rangers, the wardens. They showed up and they hopped out of their pickup truck and started blasting at it with not a pellet gun,
Paintball.
paintball gun. and it actually works quite well. Those paintball guns doesn't harm the animal, but they really don't like it and they take off.
Wow. So have you decided to go with paintball instead of bear spray, or are you going to stick with the bear spray?
Bear spray, it's much more compact, and people don't get excited. You haul this out. Uh, whereas you haul
See
out,
Kirk running around the campgrounds with a paintball gun.
yeah,
Like,
no, that could be bad news because people, many of them, wouldn't know the difference between a paintball gun and something more scary.
oh, wow. Beautiful. Yeah. Camping. Jim Gaffigan, a comedian in the States, has some really good material on camping and bears and stuff like that. I highly recommend listening and laughing at that stuff because I subscribe to his type of thing. We've spent thousands of years trying to figure out how to not sleep outside. And campers just throw all that away to enjoy the outdoors.
Yeah.
I don't get it. Yeah. Anything else going on? You posted something on your blog, I saw.
Yeah. So last week we talked about morality and so forth. And one of the big questions in morality when it comes to, well, what about God? I mean, why would God be a candidate for giving us perfect moral rules? Because, well, what if he changes his mind? What if he's kind of arbitrary? To wake up tomorrow and murder becomes, the epitome of saintliness or something. Or how does God know what's right? Unless there's another reference, like a repository of moral laws somewhere, perfect moral laws that he can look at and then let us know what they are. Well, in either case, if that's the case, then why don't we chuck God and go with a higher moral standard? So this boils down to something called Euthyphro's dilemma, which rose out of a conversation Plato describes in his well, it's a dialogue called Euthyphro, and it's a dialogue between Socrates and Euthyphro. And so I actually give the solution to a solution to Euthyphro's dilemma. And it arises out of the philosopher Alvin Plantinga's concept of maximal excellence. So it's a very short article. It's on my website. And if you're interested on the Euthyphro's dilemma and how to solve that problem, just check out that article. I posted it on 2 days ago.
Awesome. And I know there's been a few people checking that out. There was another piece of content that it sort of knocked off your top list on sexual morality. And can you share a little bit about that one? Because I think it'll lead into this next conversation pretty good.
Yeah. So I have a YouTube channel, and my last month, I look at each month, I look at the analytics and whatever. And last month, the number one, no, not the YouTube. This is my website again. Yeah. The number one article that people read was Death of a Child. And that was number one for last month. But this month, there was a spike upwards on sexual morality, why it may be far more important than you ever realized. And so that's the hot topic this month on my particular website. And it kind of leads, well, basically it discusses J.D. Unwin's findings in the 1930s, which he published observations of 86 civilization societies. And there's a professor at Princeton University recently just commented on Unwin's work. No one since then has actually, in the academic world, has actually exceeded what Unwin did. Unwin set the bar, and no one has cleared. He basically set the record for observations of civilizations and how sexual morality is correlated to how well that civilization flourishes.
Now, Unwin is not a Christian, right? I think we had this conversation a little bit before. So
yeah, if he was,
secular scientist going into the stats, and stuff, and looking at the different civilizations.
Yeah, so, horrendous amount of data, mind-numbingly detailed, pedantic, and boring. Which you like. We need rigor in this area.
Which you like. I'm not a big fan of the mind-numbingly boring stuff.
Oh, if you can't sleep at night. Let's say if you're camping and you're not in your bed, pull out JD Unwin. It'll knock you out cold in about 15 minutes. Better than a general anesthetic. In fact, I'm surprised they don't pass out JD Unwin at the hospitals just prior to surgery, because you'd be gone right out of it, no problem.
Okay, next time you're camping, start reading his stuff through a bullhorn at your party or friends next door. They'll be out.
Oh, they'll be all sound asleep in no time. No, and probably the bears too.
The Bears, knock out the Bears with JD Unwin. Oh, beautiful. Yeah, it is. Now, thankfully, you've boiled down what JD Unwin has said into something that is actually readable. And in that, you've been invited to share your thoughts and stuff, and we've talked about that before too. But again, it leads into this next conversation that we're having today, because little Supreme Court case down in the States. Now, Canada, totally different than the States. We don't have any rules at all in this, but the U.S. Supreme Court came down and said Roe versus Wade is not valid, and shot it down. Punts everything back to the states, where each state has the option of legalizing abortion in whatever their population sees fit. Now, that's the legislative morality. What we're talking about now, what we talked about last week, was where does morality come from? And it transcends the law. It goes beyond the law, because it actually makes a difference for how we flourish as humans, how we are built, how we are meant to behave. The things that, if humanity's meant to do a certain thing and you disobey that, there's consequences to that. Well, Unwin talks about society's fall when those consequences are ignored and people just do whatever they want. Now, legislating morality doesn't change hearts. It doesn't change minds. It might change some behavior. But the conversation now is, what about women are just going to have abortions? They're just not going to be safe anymore. And in that conversation, we have to ask the question, if it is terminating a life, it's never safe. At least 50% of the people involved are dying. If it's not terminating a life, why are we even having this conversation? It doesn't matter. But if it's terminating a life, it's not safe regardless. Now, the other thing is, we have two white old people talking here, and men, do we even have the right to talk about this subject? And so I want to really focus on the science, the philosophy, and that stuff, not the politics, because the politics doesn't matter. It really doesn't. But what does the science say? What does the philosophy say? We might touch on what the Bible says a little bit too, but from this, in this discussion, this is really a foundational question. When does life begin? To start with, I'm going to share a little bit of my background. I've got 3 kids. My oldest graduated this past week. When she was initially conceived, and early on, we found out my wife was pregnant. She had been pregnant for 2 weeks, and we found out because she had really bad morning sickness all the way through all 9 months of all of our pregnancies. It was nasty. So when she starts throwing up a certain way, we know, okay, she's pregnant.
I've had 6 kids.
Yeah.
Not me, but my wife has.
Yeah. And so we stopped at 3, but it was really tough. Now, with our firstborn, who just graduated, we had an ultrasound at 5 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks. And The reason for that is that she was having pain. My wife was having pain, and the doctor was concerned it was ectopic pregnancy, which is not viable. That's where the egg embeds itself into the fallopian tube. It will kill the mom. And so the solution to that, to prevent the mom from dying, would be to get that egg out of there. Now, in the process of having this conversation, we had an ultrasound at 5 weeks. And there's a little heartbeat going. And we were able to know, okay, no, it's not in the fallopian tube. It's in the area it needs to be embedded in. Okay, good. But in that time, and I know we wanted the baby, which is different than when the situation's different, but the feelings that we had for that baby, where this is a life, that heart is beating. That's a feelings question, or that's a feelings aspect. Kirk, first let's talk your background, your qualifications to have this conversation as a scientist are what?
Well, I do have a PhD in biophysics, and in biophysics you are examined for your qualifying PhD exam. You must be examined in both the discipline of biology as well as the discipline, in my case, the discipline of computer science, and how those mesh. But biology was the foundational part of biophysics. So not only that, I've been very much involved in the question of what is the minimum amount, what do we need to create a minimum life form in the way of proteins or protein coding genes? Like what constitutes the bare bones basic, smallest, most simplest piece of life that would qualify as life? And that's been an ongoing discussion in the literature for decades, really. And basically it goes up and down, and I don't know what the latest numbers are. It's been down quite low to just 100 and some genes. I've got a number of papers here, but one of the more recent ones is maybe 200 and maybe under 300, although some are now saying we actually need more. But the bottom line is I have a good idea from the scientific perspective of what scientists might call life and what scientists might say that's not life. And then when that's coupled with my philosophy training, did a master's in philosophy where, philosophers, they think a lot. That's part of being a philosopher is you need to think.
That's their only job.
Thinking. Well, sometimes they get interviewed, like my ethics philosopher, my ethics prof in graduate studies was often interviewed on our national TV when it came up to an ethical dilemma that the government or some country or was facing. They'd call in my ethics prof, and he would be on CBC News being interviewed. So sometimes philosophers do make the limelight, but most of the time they sit behind.
Okay, but they're thinking and then they're talking about what they thought about.
That's right, and writing our papers about it, which again would be another candidate to put you to sleep if you have a hard time falling asleep at night. Just read some philosophy papers. I like them, but I can't say that for everybody. So from the question of what is life, there's actually, as a philosopher here and a scientist, that needs to be boiled down to, well, it depends. If we're talking just biological life, it also depends from a philosophical perspective on what it means to be a human being. Because if from a philosophical perspective, Plato, for example, strongly believed we're not just a body. If we're just a body, then the only question we're concerned about is when does biological life begin? That's the only question we're really concerned about.
So that's a science question then.
That's the science question. The philosophical question would be, well, what about, what are we if we're first and foremost an eternal soul that dwells within a body in this world? Well, then the question also needs to be asked, when does a human being come into existence? Or also, when in our society here, when do you become a person? And that's usually defined by the government when you become an official person. But philosophically, it is related. So there's three things here: biology, philosophy with regard to what does it mean to be a human and when do you become a human being, closely related possibly to the scientific question. And then finally, a different question is when do you become a person? And, personhood is kind of subjective. It's defined by, politicians in government.
Well, and just in that, at this point, governments you can have a government building 200 miles away from another government building, and they have a totally different view on that.
Yeah, well, there's the silo effect, I guess, where everybody's working in their own little area and they're not aware of what's working in this area here, which is, by the way, what the biophysics department in my university tried to overcome is bridging departments, computer science and biology and engineering, that sort of thing. So biologically speaking, life, let's say immediately after the fertilization, when you've got the full set of chromosomes involved now and cell division has started, if we were to develop something like that in a lab, there is absolutely no question that would be billed as life. It would make the headlines all over the world. The lab that did that, or the scientist that was in charge of that experiment, would probably get the Nobel Prize for inventing life in the lab. And it would be highly complex life, far more complex than what the journal papers now currently talk about when they're talking about the minimal genome, the minimal stripped down, simplest possible life form. No. Immediately after conception, let's say when the sperm enters the egg and you begin to see cell division occur, when the first moment of cell division occurs, you now have a very impressive life form, far more impressive than what scientists have talked about when they're talking about the minimal life form. So
like if we're talking about Elon Musk wants to find life on Mars,
exactly.
or Mercury or something like that. When they say we found life on another planet, that's less than what we see when the sperm enters the egg.
Well, we haven't found life itself on another planet, although this morning, I think it was this morning in the news, I saw they have found some, or was it yesterday, carbon compounds that they suggest could have come from life. Okay. Now that's really, really simple. That's a joke when in compared to, say, just one gene coding protein. And keep in mind, for the simplest life form, you need hundreds of them. But yeah, so the standard of what constitutes life is also affected subjectively by the desire for funding. So you want to keep the funders, the governments and whatever, give them some hope that you're going in the right direction to find life. But if they ever found anything like a fertilized human embryo, ever found anything like that on another planet of the same degree of complexity, obviously it's probably not going to be a human embryo, but if they found a single cell,
alien life form
that was dividing and contained the digital information to the extent that a human fertilized egg does, there would be no question whatsoever in the world of science that we have discovered life on another planet. So that is the discovery of biological life. But then it does raise the question, well, if that's all a human being is, then you got 100% human right there. There's no question about it. Although if we are an eternal soul, if there's that thing that Plato called the psyche, or the Bible calls the soul, if we have one of those, then the question is, well, at what stage do we get the eternal soul? Do you get that first and then the fertilized egg? And that seems a little odd because there's no body, so to speak, or biological entity within which the soul can exist. So that seems odd. So it's more likely to be, we don't know. It could be simultaneous with conception, or it could be 10 seconds later. It could be a week later. We just don't know at that point. So there is now the people would claim to know, or they would say, to be on the safe side, let's go with at conception. And there is something to be said for that kind of human life. That is, a human life as defined as not just the biological component, but the soul component. The thing would be, let's say, let's take a, let's say a hunter. A hunter was roaming through the forest and came upon an old abandoned farm site with the buildings all fallen down pretty much. But there was this one little and you'll often see them on old farm sites. We called them a biffy back home, but it's a tiny little building, maybe, a yard and a half by a yard and a half. And it's just got one little door, and that's the bathroom. Well, that's the toilet, so to speak. It's just usually a bench with one hole, maybe two. That's what's in, so imagine the hunter is coming through the forest and he sees this old abandoned farm site, looks completely derelict. And it doesn't look like anybody has been there for years. Grass has grown, trees, but there's the biffy, and he sees a little knothole in the biffy, and he begins to wonder, I wonder if my rifle's sighted in properly. And so he lines up, he doesn't check inside the biffy, mind you. So he doesn't know what's in there. But instead, he takes a shot through the knothole, and maybe two or three, and then walks up to it to find out if there was, how close his shots were. And just out of curiosity, while he's there, he opens the door. And there was another hunter in there, and he's in deep trouble. Let's not, you can imagine the details. So he gets eventually arrested. He appears in court. And so would he get off? Because he could say, I didn't know there was anybody in the biffy. Well, that I don't think would fly in court, because it was within his ability to check to see if there was anybody in there. And if he was not able to check, the courts would still hold him responsible for what we call in Canada the careless use of a firearm. That is, you shot at something and you had no idea what was in or behind your target. You would be charged with a criminal charge, and you would do hard time. And what is the principle here? The principle is, if you are not in a position to know for sure, it's whether you're going to end life or not. In other words, we're talking about life here. The proper, morally responsible thing to do is to avoid causing harm, just in case just in case that person, that little embryo, does have an eternal soul, and it's already a person, even though it's very underdeveloped. Now, the interesting thing about that, or already a real human with a soul, interesting thing about that is that most miscarriages occur in the first, say, 13 weeks of pregnancy. And it's often due to serious genetic problems. There's some sort of problem with one of the genes, or a lot of genes, a chromosome or whatever, and it's just not viable, and it's just not going to survive. And a spontaneous abortion occurs most often during that first trimester. The end result is that is there life in there somewhere? And this is the interesting thing, because the oldest book in the Bible, the book of Job, compares a wealthy man or a powerful man with a miscarriage, and says that the world is so messed up sometimes, it'd probably be better to be a miscarriage, and that way you avoid all the pain and suffering in this world. And when comparing it with the kings and the powerful people that have lived in this world and the miscarriage, it says both go to the same place. There they know nothing about this world anymore, and so on and so forth. But the key thing is that as far as an eternal soul, and this also occurs in the book of Ecclesiastes. It compares a miscarriage with a person that lives 1,000 years, very wealthy and powerful. But then they both die, miscarriage and the wealthy person. It says they both go to the same place. So the point in there is that we do have some not just philosophical but theological reasons to believe that even a miscarriage has an eternal soul and is regarded as fully human by God. And of course, the body itself was highly defective, and in the resurrection we get a new one. So and when does that happen? To be honest, I don't know. I don't know when it happens. And so I tend to err on the safe side, that life I'll just treat it as if it begins earlier rather than later. There's a lot more details, nuances, and questions, that sort of thing. But that's just a kind of an introduction into the question of when does life begin?
Okay, so science would say you have a life when the cells start splitting,
Mm-hmm.
the genomes have been merged. I don't know what the
You got a complete human genome in there, and you got cell division. It's kind of like one brick dividing into two bricks, dividing into four, dividing into eight, and so on and so forth.
yeah.
And at some point, it's amazing. The genetic information says that at some codes, it's like a computer program overseeing the process. And at some point, these bricks over here, so to speak, these cells, they begin to differentiate into bones and heart and brain. And it's really quite way more impressive than any of our space probes that tend to go to a planet and then come into different sections. And this one goes into orbit. That one travels around on the planet and so forth.
Yeah, and what I found amazing when we had that ultrasound at 4 weeks was the heartbeat was there. You couldn't really see a heart. You couldn't really see. It was. She said it was the size of a grain of rice, but you could see a beat in that, and so again, like as we talk here, we're trying to just determine that when does life begin question. And so from a science perspective, from a feelings perspective, it really has to do when that when the life has started the process of growing and being created. Now, if you don't believe that, and you say, okay, well, it's when the dependency on the mom isn't, and I've heard this as being a dividing line for some laws, is when they're not dependent on the mom anymore. So that to me is what they're saying is when they're out of the womb and the umbilical cord's cut, that's when they're viable. But we know that you can't just leave the baby on the table for 2 weeks and the baby needs help. The baby's still dependent on the mom. So from a philosophical perspective, is there something beyond, like I know you went to Job and Ecclesiastes. Is there something outside of the Bible that might put some information on this? I don't know. And just so everybody's watching here, I haven't asked Kirk these questions beforehand. So he's literally having to figure out in his head if he's ever read anything.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That makes it more real and fun.
Well, it makes those late nights reading philosophy papers useful.
That's what live streaming is all about. Like just fling your, and by the way, now, if anybody watches this either now or later, please put your questions in the comments below, especially most of the people watch these live streams later. And, hopefully we'd be able to address them maybe in a subsequent live stream sometime, right after. But yeah, no. So you see, one philosophical problem we have is when humans run into a situation that they don't particularly, let's say with cold, hard logic and science, says something that really is a bit of they don't want to hear, or they don't really, it doesn't agree, they don't agree with, then things become subjective. So the question is, what is life could become subjective here. Like you mentioning, total independence of the mother would be one. Incidentally, we have quite a few nurses in our immediate family and in our extended family and in our close friends, quite a few. And just this weekend, my wife was talking with one of them, and in their hospital, they delivered a baby that was only 21 weeks. Now, it normally takes roughly 40 or 39 or 40 weeks. That's pretty normal. 21 weeks is normally you need intubation and so forth. This one did not need intubation. It was delivered, and it was it was able to survive just right from 21 weeks without having tubes stuck down it and put on basically life support or
That's incredible.
yeah, it was incredible. So at 21 weeks, it was obviously obviously alive, obviously at 21 weeks. That's just literally just 1 week past the halfway mark. So that would be that's a complicating factor if we use see we like to make different criteria and it's an honest approach. I mean we're thinking humans are thinking beings and we like to think about these things and try and figure it out. Like, I as I already admitted, I don't know when the that little wee tiny life form is bestowed with a soul, the eternal soul, but it does seem to be it's sometime in the first trimester, judging from the miscarriage having an eternal soul. But what about the other criteria? Another one is, when the heart starts beating or when the baby becomes sentient, like able to become self-aware. Like, how do you know if a baby's self-aware or, that it's probably unethical? Probably, I'd say it is unethical to do brain experiments on babies while they're in the womb. So there's a lot of unanswered questions that we have.
But we do know that babies react.
Oh yeah, we
when
do.
When they're old enough to kick,
Yeah.
they react to music, they react to motion,
Yep.
that kind of stuff. So we know that happens.
Yeah.
What week? I can't remember from the books that we were reading, but
so I think that it's best, but basically it's probably best to err on the side of caution when it comes to the question of when does life begin. But as I've already said, the question of life itself is, well, what do we mean by life? Is it just biological life? And so this goes back to another live stream we had before when we talked about materialism. That is, what if the whole world is all of reality is just space-time, matter, and energy, and the laws of physics. There is no soul, so to speak. There is no human mind. It's just a brain completely controlled.
No free will, no logic, no thinking.
No. It's all controlled completely and totally by chemistry and physics. So in that world, when does life begin? Well, biological life would begin at conception. It would begin when cell division began, but really, life, according to what? Because it would just be an agglomeration of cells, basically atoms and elements that are controlled by physics and chemistry. And strictly speaking, it's all determined by the initial conditions of the universe and the laws of physics. So there would actually be, it's just another step. It's just another physics and chemistry step in a gigantic causal chain that goes back to the origin of the world.
So it's a bag of meat.
What?
So it's a bag of meat all the way through. We're just bags of meat.
Yeah, if that's all, if it's a material world, we're it's not very. But we tend to be incredibly racist, or maybe racist isn't the word, but speciest when we're talking about human beings, because we think, let's say somebody's walking down the street and they happen to bump into you. We think it's wrong to just give them a right hook to the jaw and a drop kick. That would be wrong. But we have no problem whatsoever in swatting mosquitoes. And I will confess, I killed a lot of mosquitoes last weekend while camping.
That's good. Keeps
and I shudder to think how many billions, maybe trillions of life forms are exterminated every day.
Hey, eating a salad is murder when you talk about life.
Well, that's small potatoes compared to purification of city water. And so we tend to think that it's all right to kill bacteria and swat mosquitoes. And we even, when our pets get old, we put them down. Although that trend is coming now to human beings and their quality. That could be another episode when we talk about physician-assisted death, for example, euthanasia or physician-assisted death. And those are slightly different things. So that would be an interesting topic for another live stream. And I've addressed that in a group of teenagers once in a formal seminar. But really, there's no It's not a big issue. In fact, the mere fact that we are having a huge uproar over what went on in the U.S. here this past week or two with the Roe versus Wade, the mere fact that's occurring tells us there's something else going on in the human mind. It's not just a chemistry and physics process, because if it were, the ruling by the Supreme Court would have been determined by the initial conditions of the universe. And so would our reactions be determined by the initial conditions of the universe. And once you realize that, you realize there are no ethical questions. Everything is determined by space-time, matter, and energy, and the laws of physics. The initial
And the ruling is neither right nor wrong.
It's neither right nor wrong. And talking about life is absurd, because it's just another stage of complex chemical reactions. And chemical reactions are going on all the time, even chain reactions. For example, some might argue that the sun is alive. Well, why would that be? Well, in a fusion reaction, there's enough energy released and enough high energy particles released that can get away on you. And in the sun, it has gotten away to a limited extent, and then it's limited. If it completely gets away, as sometimes it does in stars, it can become a nova or a supernova. And then we would have problems here on Earth, but really it wouldn't be
The
problems.
satellite reception would really go down.
Satellite reception, you wouldn't have any satellites nor anything to receive the satellites, or anybody on the planet to worry about whether you got satellite reception. We would just be annihilated in a intense temperature. So back to the question of when does life begin, it's what I'm trying to show here is that there's a lattice work of different angles, different disciplines, different ways of, not ways of thinking, but logic, science, biology, philosophy, theology, all look at this question from maybe a different perspective, but they're looking at the same thing. And you cannot get an accurate view of when life begins by necessarily looking at just one perspective, unless there is an ultimate perspective that does sum up all the loose ends and converge. And I would suggest that there is, but a lot of people would disagree with me. So,
and if you disagree, put it in the comments, because we would love to hear from you. Those of you watching, please like the video. It helps us just with the algorithms, and click the little subscribe button and hit the bell when you want to be notified of what's going on. Those of you that are watching, what are you thinking? What are you hearing when you're listening to us right now? Are we on the right page? What do you disagree with? Kirk having the background in science and philosophy, he's looked at this question a lot. And if there's new science or new philosophy that says, no, Kirk, you're wrong, here's a link, please post it, because we would love to have that look.
The other thing I've done, sorry, go ahead, Sheldon.
And so, I know a lot of you watch it after. Way more people watch these after. That's what happens when you do a live stream during the day. But we do watch those comments. We do respond to them. And if you want to have a conversation with us, let's say you've made a decision in the past and you want to talk to somebody about it, or you're in the process of trying to determine what you want to do with a pregnancy you're in or something like that, please reach out. We would love to have a conversation with you. And we're not judgy. We are not.
Sure.
We're not here to shame anyone. We just want to start with what's going on and hear your story.
Yeah. Part of the problem with being able to talk about this just in a relaxed manner. And one of the things that an experience I had just a few years ago at the University of Guelph was there was a huge pro-choice protest on campus, and I just observed, and I was moving on, and then I happened to be just outside of one of the student offices where I guess that had organized this, and two women who had been in the protest came by, and I could tell they were carrying their signs and everything. So I just says, "Hey, I saw the protest there in the student center, and I'm a philosopher," I said, and so I wonder about things that people, normally don't wonder about. And I guess my question was, as a philosopher here, is does the when do we have an eternal soul? Is there a soul? Are we just a bag of meat, or do we have a soul? And when does that soul? What happens if, an abortion, for example? What are we doing to the person if they do have a soul? What happens to that? Well, one of the women, a student at that university, found that incredibly intriguing. And I was not, I didn't ask the question in a way that, in a gotcha sort of way, or just, I just wanted to hear if she'd thought about this and what her response would be. And it was a good conversation. She had never thought about that, and she thought that was really something new for her. And so that's part of the question, what if human life includes an eternal soul? What happens? When do we get that eternal soul, and so forth? Just a tangential thing is that from the Bible, it does seem to state that God creates the eternal soul. So biologically speaking, we have a purely scientific explanation for a human being in terms of how conception occurs and mitosis or cell division or whatever. But from a soul perspective, then of course that has nothing to do with science. It's more philosophy and theology.
And so though, and we're not sure about that, other than according to some Bible scriptures, it would looks like it's at conception, or at least early in the pregnancy. I had another question that just slipped my mind. What is a question that slips out of the mind in Hossenfelder's world look like? Is that just a...
Oh yeah, good question. I would say, that's a wonderful question, Sheldon. I've never heard that question asked in my entire life, and I've heard a lot of questions. That's a beautiful question. So what happens when you have a question, but it slips out of your mind before you can ask it? I would suggest that what happened is
Bad particles?
It would be chemistry,
collision?
mostly chemistry and physics, had started a brain state, but the brain state did not reach a point where electrical impulses were sent to your mouth, for example, or your fingers if you're typing it out. And that happens all the time, in nature. Is you'll have chemical reactions that they start off going in this direction, but then something happens, or they run out of steam, or some other chemical reaction overrides it. And so that's the explanation, Sheldon, for why you didn't remember your question.
Okay, I have a follow-up question. Why do I feel old when that happens?
Now, that is a very good question. All I could suggest is that as you get old, if from a material perspective, and it also works, I think, from any perspective, because we have a brain, and even if we are a mind, the eternal mind that interfaces through the physical world through the brain itself is the environment within which all those non-physical concepts and thoughts you have are converted into electrical signals and chemical processes. So maybe it is that the brain, liken a brain to an aquarium. So when it's brand new, you got lots of fish and you got lots of interesting stuff, and there's things happening. But as that aquarium degenerates, let's say, some of the really fancy stuff that used to happen doesn't happen anymore. It happens, but not as often. And so that's why I would say you would forget more often, because there's more chemistry reactions started, but there's not the resources there to bring them to completion and actually output whatever it is you wanted to output.
Well, in a future episode, we can get into when does life end and that kind of thing, because that's a whole nother discussion. But
kind of related, yeah. But it's the far end of the discussion.
So I have no idea what brilliant question I was going to ask earlier. But
good comment there by Warren.
It's gone. Oh, I missed it. It's like a firework that fails to launch if you hold fireworks. Yeah, yeah. We have legal fireworks here, so they were going all off all night the other night. You can blow off as many you want here, but anytime, anywhere, you can just do it in your backyard. So some of those are like, okay, neighbors are launching off the fireworks. I think I'm going to stay inside, just because you never know where those things are coming down.
I saw one where one of the things fell over and then fired into the crowd and literally blew over several people. Big concussion. There is one more thing I think we should maybe at least end on, or at least put out there. And that is, let's say life begins, very close to conception or at conception. There's a tendency, and it's a good tendency, to feel bad if we've actually ended innocent life. And what could possibly be more innocent than a person who's never actually faced a moral decision yet? And it's possible to feel bad about that. And as a philosopher, I did my master's in a particular area to do with the complexity of history and how small actions in the present can lead to massive impacts in the future.
Butterfly effect.
The butterfly effect, basically. And so, although I have never actually killed anybody that I'm aware of, the one thing I am aware of is that my decisions on a daily basis do affect, and they multiply to more and more people. And I have said harmful things. I have done things that were stupid. I've done things that were dangerous, and I don't know how that's unfolding into the future. The bottom line is this: I have no idea if some of the less morally right decisions I've made in my life, I have no idea if that is actually at some point in the future going to cost people's lives. And because I have no idea, I can never look down or judge another person who has knowingly or unknowingly ended the life of a human being. I can never look down on such a person. Basically, we're all in the same boat. So I just wanted to say that because I know people who have gone through this, and they felt terrible afterwards. They feel terrible for decades afterwards. And God loves us, and he has made a way to heal us. And secondly, we're all in the same boat. We're all in the same boat. It's just that I don't know what the future consequences of my actions are right now, or that I've done over the course of my life. I don't know what they are, but I probably don't want to know. To be honest with you, I don't want to know, because I probably would be tormented at night and couldn't sleep by all the thousands of decisions. So if this question on when does life begin has, let's say, implications for you as an individual, that like Sheldon says, that we can't judge anybody because we ourselves we've all messed up in different ways. So just keep that in mind. And their comment in the thing here, there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Like, I don't even want to think about how the future consequences and the present consequences of things I've done, but there is complete forgiveness. He makes you whiter than snow, as he describes. And you have no idea how he readjusts history to compensate for the things we've done, to actually bring about a greater good. We have no idea on that. So all we know is that there is this question that we've dealt with today doesn't have to be guilt-inducing. Certainly, we can't judge anybody on this question. We're just looking at, when does life begin? And food for thought. That's basically what it is. It's kind of like cracking a door open and saying, oh, here's some possible things I think we might be seeing. Why don't you take a look? And then you take a look and you decide, what you're seeing.
And the other thing to remember is we've got a number of different videos that we did. We did on what does it mean to be human? What is it? Yeah. Where does morality and those kind of things come from? We haven't really touched on forgiveness and different things like that here, but there's lots of stuff out there if you have that guilty feeling that you made a mistake. Well, that's a good thing. It means your body is telling you something. It's being told from something that you made a mistake, and that's where
and we can learn from that and adjust accordingly. And that's what life is all about. We're constantly making mistakes, constantly learning from them, and then we adjust accordingly. And that's pretty much a personal thing. As soon as I start imposing the things I've learned on other people personally, well, that's not really my job as a Christian. Government has a totally different responsibility, and we're not really talking about that. We're just talking about as a person who follows Christ. My job is to let people know where healing comes from and where forgiveness comes from.
And there is one other thing that we have a job to do as Christians, as the church. And there's not a lot that Jesus commanded us to do and in the New Testament in terms of rules and actions that we're supposed to do. One is tell other people about Jesus, but one of the other main ones is take care of the widows and the orphans. He does care after birth.
Oh, yes.
And
Absolutely.
I think that's the other piece that I've been seeing a lot of on Twitter and stuff is why are the pro-life people only caring until the baby's born? Well,
which is an urban myth, because in reality, it's totally the other way around.
Yeah. But there is a command, very clear command, to take care of the widows of the orphans. So,
Part of loving your neighbors yourself.
Yeah.
And Jesus, well, I don't want to say he especially loved the people who are outcasts of society or having problems, because that implies there was some sort of ranking in the love that Christ has for us. But it was certainly no less. In fact, they loved hanging around with him. The people of the day in his first century, the people who were basically looked down on or outcast or having real problems, he loved those people, and they loved hanging around with him because they could see he loves them. And it's still the same today.
And kids.
Yeah,
he loved hanging out with the kids. And one of my favorite stories is when he basically got really steamed at the disciples for trying to shut down conversations.
Yeah, the kids, they're not important, said the disciples, or they implied that. And Jesus says, nope, that's quite the opposite. Yep. It says we all need to become like children in a certain way.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, awesome conversation. Again, those of you watching, hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified of future stuff, and comment and leave us messages. Tell us if we're wrong. Tell us if you vehemently disagree with anything that we've said, because we just want to have a conversation.
Yeah. And why you disagree.
And yeah, make sure don't just call us Nazis or whatever, but just why do you disagree? And what's your scientific or philosophy that tells us we're wrong? All right. Have a good. Next week we're not going to be doing a live stream because Kirk is busy dealing with some family matters. And with the summer hitting, we'll probably do one in a couple weeks, but we just have lots of stuff going on in the summer. So if you are going, man, I'm really going to miss you guys. Kirk has a ton of videos out, as well as some articles on his website. Go ahead and comment on those. We'll be watching those comments. It doesn't matter how old the video is. We do pay attention to what comments come through. Mm-hmm. And so who knows, we might do a little pop-up stream here and there. But we will see you in a couple weeks, Kirk, and enjoy your time away. And
I will. I hope.
Thank you all for watching.
Yep. Bye for now.
Again.